You missed a spot right here.
My apologies, General. It is done.
The narrative of Daniel Edgar Sickles begins not on the battlefield, but in the smoke-filled rooms and bustling streets of mid-19th century New York City, a crucible of commerce and political machination. Born into a family of comfortable standing, his father, George Garrett Sickles, was a patent lawyer and real estate speculator who amassed considerable wealth. Daniel was afforded opportunities that sharpened his innate, restless intelligence. While historical records vacillate on his exact birth year, placing it between 1819 and 1825, the consensus of October 1819 suggests a man who, by the outbreak of the Civil War, was entering his fifth decade. Sickles rejected the traditional path of university education, preferring the practical and volatile education of the print shop and the law office. He apprenticed as a printer before studying law under Benjamin Butler, gaining admission to the bar in 1843. However, the courtroom was merely a stepping stone. His true vocation was politics, and his temple was Tammany Hall, the powerful democratic machine that controlled New York City's political pulse. In the rough-and-tumble ecosystem of Tammany, Sickles thrived. He was charismatic, ambitious, and unburdened by excessive scruples, traits that endeared him to the party bosses and the electorate alike. His ascent was rapid. He secured the position of Corporation Counsel for New York City and, in 1847, won a seat in the New York State Assembly. His reputation was a tapestry of brilliance and notoriety. To his supporters, he was a rising star. To the city's patrician class, he was a parvenu of the worst sort. The diarist, George Templeton Strong, a contemporary observer of New York society, recorded a withering assessment of Sickles in 1851, describing him as one of the bigger bubbles of the scum of the profession, swollen and windy, and puffed out with fetid gas. In 1852, Sickles cemented his social standing and courted scandal through his marriage to Teresa Baggioli. Teresa was the daughter of Antonio Baggioli, a distinguished Italian composer and voice teacher who had lived in the household of Lorenzo da Ponte, a professor at New York University where Sickles had lived as a student. The union was controversial primarily due to the age disparity. Sickles was 33, while Teresa was estimated to be 16, a soft, lovely, and youthful girl who possessed a sophistication that belied her years, reportedly speaking 5 languages. The marriage brought together Sickles' raw political ambition with the cultural refinement of the Baggioli lineage. Despite the initial disapproval of both families, the couple established themselves as a formidable social unit. In 1856, Sickles' political horizon expanded significantly when he was elected to the United States House of Representatives as a Democrat. The move to Washington, D.C. marked the transition from local operator to national figure. Upon arriving in the capital, the Sickles couple leased a mansion on Lafayette Square, a prestigious address located directly across from the White House, then known as the Executive Mansion. The location was symbolic of Sickles' proximity to the center of power. He was a staunch supporter and confidant of President James Buchanan. The Sickles residence became the epicenter of Washington's antebellum social scene. They hosted lavish dinner parties and receptions that attracted the city's political and social elite. Teresa Sickles, with her beauty and linguistic talents, shone as a hostess, navigating the complex etiquette of a city that was teetering on the brink of sectional crisis. The press fawned over their hospitality, with reporters like Henry Watterson describing their home as a venue of impressive receptions. Underneath this veneer of domestic and social success, however, lay the fault lines of a tragedy. Sickles, consumed by his congressional duties and his own extracurricular interests, often left his young wife to her own devices. In the social mores of the time, it was not uncommon for a trusted male friend to act as an escort for a politician's wife at social functions. For the Sickles family, this role was filled by Philip Barton Key II. Philip Barton Key II was a figure of impeccable pedigree and charm. He was the United States District Attorney for the District of Columbia and the son of Francis Scott Key, the revered author of The Star-Spangled Banner. A widower described as the handsomest man in all Washington society, Key was a dashing figure known for his sociability and his appetite for women. Sickles and Key had met years prior at a late-night card game and had become fast friends, bonding over their shared profession and similar temperaments. Both were described as sociable, egocentric, debonair, and known womanizers. Sickles welcomed Key into his home, trusting him implicitly. Key became a fixture in the Sickles household, frequently accompanying Teresa to parties and riding with her in her carriage. This trust, however, was misplaced. While Sickles was engaged in the machinations of Congress and his own rumored indiscretions, the relationship between Key and Teresa evolved from social friendship to illicit intimacy. The dalliance, as it was later described in the press, was conducted in the shadows of a city that thrived on gossip. Key, a man who did not hesitate to pursue his desires, began a clandestine affair with the wife of his friend. The stage was set in the winter of 1859. The Sickles home on Lafayette Square, a symbol of their ascent, sat just a few hundred yards from the club where Key would watch for Teresa's signals. The ambitious congressman, the young wife, and the dashing district attorney were locked in a triangle that would soon shatter the peace of the capital and lead to a confrontation that would rewrite the American legal code. The meticulously constructed facade of the Sickles marriage began to crumble in late February 1859. While rumors of the affair between Teresa Sickles and Philip Barton Key had been circulating through Washington's social channels, whispers of carriage rides on the outskirts of the city and stolen glances at balls, Daniel Sickles remained oblivious. His ignorance was shattered on February 24, 1859, by the arrival of an anonymous letter. The letter was not a vague warning, but a precise indictment. It detailed the affair with brutal clarity, accusing Key of dishonoring Sickles' bed. The writer provided specific intelligence, directing Sickles to a house on 15th Street in a modest neighborhood, far removed from the grandeur of Lafayette Square. This house, the letter alleged, was rented by Key for the sole purpose of his rendezvous with Teresa. It described Key's methods of signaling, hanging a string or ribbon on the door to indicate the coast was clear, or walking past the Sickles home and waving a handkerchief. Sickles, a man whose public life was built on perception and honor, was devastated. He launched a private investigation to verify the claims. He enlisted friends to surveil the property on 15th Street. Their report confirmed the worst. A woman fitting Teresa's description was seen entering the rear door, while Key entered the front, their visits lasting about an hour. Armed with this surveillance, Sickles confronted Teresa in their home. The scene was one of intense emotional violence. Initially, Teresa attempted to deny the accusations, but as Sickles recited the specific details gathered by his spies, her defense collapsed. Under the weight of the evidence and her husband's fury, Teresa confessed. Sickles demanded a written admission. He stood over her as she wrote, documenting the affair. In her confession, she admitted to meeting Key at the house on 15th Street and confirmed the nature of their relationship. The revelation broke Sickles. Witnesses later described him as overwhelmed with grief, sobbing uncontrollably and declaring himself a dishonored and ruined man. He withdrew her wedding ring and a pair of diamond earrings he had given her, stripping her of the symbols of their union. However, his grief quickly calcified into a cold, murderous resolve. In the context of 19th century honor culture, the unwritten law suggested that a husband was justified in avenging the defilement of his marriage. Sunday, February 27, 1859, was a mild, sunny day in Washington. The city was quiet, with residents preparing for church or afternoon strolls. Inside the Sickles mansion, however, the atmosphere was toxic. Sickles remained indoors, pacing, consumed by the betrayal. Fatefully, Philip Barton Key, unaware that his secret had been exposed, followed his usual routine. He was seen in Lafayette Square, casually pacing in front of the Sickles residence. He waved a handkerchief toward the house, a signal intended for Teresa, unaware that she was now a prisoner of her husband's rage. Sickles observed this from his window. He was in the company of Samuel F. Butterworth, a political associate. The sight of Key signaling for his wife in broad daylight, in full view of his home and the White House, was a provocation Sickles could not endure. He pointed Key out to Butterworth, declaring that the scoundrel had dishonored his house. Butterworth, rather than counseling restraint, reportedly told him, "If that be so, there is but one course left for you as a man of honor. You need no advice." Sickles prepared for violence. He armed himself with a pistol and a derringer, ensuring he had multiple means of lethality. He stepped out of his front door and walked briskly into Lafayette Square. Key was standing near the clubhouse on the square, chatting with a friend. He saw Butterworth approaching and exchanged a greeting. Then he saw Sickles. Misinterpreting the congressman's approach, Key extended his hand in a gesture of friendship, asking, "How are you?" The response was immediate. Sickles ignored the hand. His voice, raised for the square to hear, cut through the Sunday calm. "You villain, you have dishonored my house, and you must die." Key, unarmed except for a pair of opera glasses he had used to watch Teresa's window, realized too late the danger he was in. He retreated, stumbling backward as Sickles drew his weapon. The first shot rang out, missing Key but signaling the start of the execution. "Murder! Don't kill me!" Key shouted, his voice echoing off the surrounding mansions. He threw the opera glasses at Sickles in a desperate, futile attempt to defend himself. They struck Sickles harmlessly and fell to the ground. Sickles did not pause. He fired again. This bullet struck Key, who staggered and fell near a tree. The district attorney lay on the ground, wounded and helpless, pleading for his life. Sickles stood over him, the pistol raised, his face set in a mask of vengeance. The onlookers in the square, servants, pedestrians, and politicians, stood frozen in horror as the congressman prepared to deliver the final judgment. The narrative pauses here, with Philip Barton Key bleeding on the grass of Lafayette Square and Daniel Sickles standing over him. While the events of 1859 defined Daniel Sickles' early notoriety, the central obsession of his later life, and the focus of this report, was not the life he took, but the limb he lost. The path from the courtroom in Washington to the bloody fields of Pennsylvania was paved by the Civil War, which offered Sickles a chance at redemption. In 1861, he raised the Excelsior Brigade from New York, leveraging his political clout to secure a commission as a brigadier general. By 1863, he was a major general commanding the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac. It is here, in the sweltering heat of July 1863, that the story of the general and his leg begins in earnest. On July 2, 1863, the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, General Sickles was ordered by the Army commander, General George Meade, to hold a position on the Union left flank, extending south from Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top. However, Sickles was dissatisfied with this ground. He looked forward and saw a plateau along the Emmitsburg Road, specifically a rise at the Joseph Sherfy farm known as the Peach Orchard, that appeared to offer a better field of fire for his artillery. Haunted by his experience at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where he believed the Union had ceded critical high ground, Hazel Grove, to its detriment, Sickles made a unilateral decision. Without Meade's authorization, he ordered his entire corps to advance nearly a mile forward. This movement created a salient, a bulging angle in the line, centered on the Peach Orchard. While it placed his artillery on higher ground, it dangerously thinned his lines, disconnected him from the rest of the Union Army, and exposed his flanks to attack from multiple directions. The consequences of this move were immediate and devastating. Confederate Lieutenant General James Longstreet launched a massive assault that crashed into Sickles' exposed position. The Peach Orchard became the scene of some of the war's most ferocious combat. Union regiments found themselves fighting for their lives in the salient. The 114th Pennsylvania Infantry, known as the Zouaves d'Afrique for their colorful uniforms, was stationed near the Sherfy House. As the Confederate brigades of Barksdale and Kershaw swept forward, the 114th was hammered. Lieutenant Francis Moran of the 73rd New York, which was rushed in to support, described the scene as a shower of bullets and bursting shells, noting that the 114th Pennsylvania was forced to withdraw under murderous fire. Similarly, Bigelow's 9th Massachusetts Battery was ordered to hold the line at the Trossel Farm to buy time for the Union retreat. Captain John Bigelow's men fought with desperate courage, firing canister shot at point-blank range into the advancing Confederates. They were eventually overrun, losing 80 horses and suffering heavy casualties, but their sacrifice delayed the enemy just long enough for a new defensive line to be formed. In the midst of this chaos, General Sickles rode near the Trossel barn, attempting to rally his crumbling corps. He was a conspicuous figure on horseback, shouting orders above the din of battle. At approximately 6:30 p.m., a 12-pound solid shot, a cannonball, fired from a Confederate battery smashed into Sickles' right leg. The impact was catastrophic. The ball shattered the tibia and fibula, leaving the lower leg hanging by shreds of muscle and skin. Despite the shock of the injury, Sickles maintained his flair for the dramatic. He quieted his frightened horse and dismounted, though he required assistance to be laid on a stretcher. A rumor quickly spread through the ranks that the general was dead. To quell the panic and demonstrate his resilience, Sickles reportedly pulled a cigar from his case, lit it, and puffed calmly as he was carried to the rear. This image, the maimed general coolly smoking amidst the wreckage of his corps, became an instant legend, a piece of battlefield theater that Sickles would cultivate for the rest of his life. Sickles was transported to the 3rd Corps Field Hospital, located at the Daniel Schaefer Farm on the Baltimore Pike. There, he was attended by Dr. Thomas Sim, the medical director of the 3rd Corps. The medical reality of 1863 offered few options for such a wound. Dr. Sim initially hoped to perform an amputation below the knee, which would have allowed for greater mobility with a prosthetic. However, after administering chloroform to anesthetize the general, a more critical examination revealed that the fractures extended up into the knee joint. The damage was too extensive. Dr. Sim performed the amputation in the field, cutting the leg just above the knee. Even in his agony, Sickles was aware of a recent order from the Surgeon General, William Hammond, establishing the Army Medical Museum. The directive called for medical officers to collect specimens of morbid anatomy, together with projectiles and foreign bodies removed, to aid in the study of military medicine. Sickles, seeing an opportunity to memorialize his sacrifice, instructed Dr. Sim to preserve the leg. The shattered bones, the tibia and fibula, were cleaned and packed into a small, coffin-shaped box. With a touch of grim aristocratic humor, Sickles had a visiting card tacked to the box. It read, "With the compliments of Major General D.E.S., United States Volunteers." The package was forwarded to Washington, D.C. While Sickles was transported to a hospital to recover, his leg arrived at the museum, beginning its second life as Specimen 1335. It was no longer just a body part, it was a relic, a political asset, and the centerpiece of a strange new chapter in the life of Daniel Sickles. The Army Medical Museum, AMM, established in 1862, was a grim repository of the war's toll. Located initially on H Street in Washington, it was created to systematically study the medical data of the conflict. The collection grew rapidly, filled with the debris of battle, shattered craniums, diseased organs, and thousands of amputated limbs. Into this collection came Specimen 1335. The museum staff, recognizing the high profile of the donor, treated the specimen with particular care. The bones were articulated with wire to maintain their anatomical structure and mounted on a wooden stand. Often, a 12-pound cannonball, representing the projectile that caused the wound, was displayed alongside it. For Daniel Sickles, the leg was not something to be discarded or forgotten. It became a focal point of his post-war identity. He initiated a ritual that would continue for decades. He would visit his own leg at the museum. These visits often occurred on July 2nd, the anniversary of the amputation. Sickles would hobble into the museum on crutches. He never adapted well to an artificial limb, accompanied by friends, subordinates from the Third Corps, or visiting dignitaries. Standing before the glass case, he would recount the story of the battle, the unauthorized advance that he framed as a heroic defense, and the moment the cannonball struck. The leg served as physical proof of his valor, a silent witness that countered the criticisms of his generalship. The eccentricity of these visits attracted the attention of the era's most keen observer, Mark Twain. Twain accompanied Sickles on one of these pilgrimages and was struck by the general's relationship with the artifact. In his autobiography, Twain noted the peculiar psychology at play. "I noticed then that the general valued his lost leg away above the one that is left. I am perfectly sure that if he had to part with either of them, he would part with the one that he has got." Twain's observation captured the essence of Sickles' character. The living leg was merely a tool for locomotion, subject to the pains of age. The amputated leg, however, was a monument. It was frozen in the moment of his greatest glory, forever heroic, forever sacrificing. By visiting it, Sickles was visiting his own legend. Specimen 1335 became one of the most popular exhibits in the museum. It drew crowds who wanted to see the bones of the famous general. The leg's fame was such that it transcended the man himself. People who knew little of the legal battles or the Corps movements knew about Sickles' leg. The museum eventually evolved into the National Museum of Health and Medicine, NMHM, moving locations over the years, but the leg remained a constant part of the collection. Sickles reportedly checked on its condition regularly, treating it with the possessiveness of a collector. He ensured it was properly displayed and dusted. This cult of the limb underscores the performative nature of Sickles' life. He understood the power of symbols. Just as he had used the opera glasses in the shooting of Key to symbolize the affair, he used the leg bones to symbolize his patriotism. He had literally given a piece of himself to the nation, and he ensured that the nation and he himself never lost sight of it. Following the Civil War, Sickles' thirst for the spotlight found a new outlet in international diplomacy. In 1869, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed him United States Minister to Spain. It was a volatile appointment for a volatile time. Spain was in the throes of political upheaval, and relations with the U.S. were strained over the issue of Cuba. Sickles arrived in Madrid with his characteristic bravado, earning the nickname the Yankee King of Spain. His tenure was marked by court intrigue and rumors of romantic entanglements. It was widely whispered, though never proven, that he conducted an affair with the deposed Queen Isabella II, who was living in exile in Paris. In 1871, he married Carmina Crech, the daughter of a Spanish counselor of state, a woman considerably younger than himself. The defining crisis of his diplomatic career occurred in 1873 with the Virginius affair. The Virginius, a ship flying the American flag and running arms to Cuban rebels, was captured by Spanish authorities. The Spanish governor in Cuba ordered the execution of the crew. 53 men, including the captain, Joseph Fry, and several Americans, were executed by firing squad. When news reached Madrid, Sickles reacted with fury. He sent a series of telegrams to Secretary of State Hamilton Fish that were bellicose and aggressive, demanding reparations and threatening the closure of the legation. Sickles seemed eager to provoke a war, perhaps sensing an opportunity for military glory. However, Secretary Fish, seeking to avoid conflict, took control of the negotiations, effectively sidelining Sickles. Feeling undermined, Sickles resigned his post in December 1873. Returning to New York, Sickles settled into the role of the grand old veteran. He served as Sheriff of New York and later as Chairman of the New York Monuments Commission. In this capacity, he was instrumental in the preservation of the Gettysburg battlefield. He pushed through legislation in 1895 that established the Gettysburg National Military Park and set its initial boundaries, including the controversial fence line that mirrored the one in Lafayette Square. However, scandal was never far away. In 1912, after decades of managing the Commission's finances, an audit revealed a shortfall. Approximately $27,000, a significant sum equivalent to nearly $1 million today, was missing from the funds intended for monuments. Sickles was accused of embezzlement. He denied the theft, claiming ignorance of where the money had gone, but he was removed from his chairmanship. He avoided prosecution largely due to his advanced age and his status as a Medal of Honor recipient, awarded in 1897 for his actions at Gettysburg. The scandal cost him his own monument. While other Corps commanders were honored with statues at Gettysburg, Sickles was not. When asked about this, he famously replied, "The entire battlefield is a monument to Dan Sickles," a statement that was both arrogant and, in a geographic sense, true, as his unauthorized movement had defined the shape of the battle. We return now to the bloody grass of Lafayette Square on February 27, 1859. After firing the shots that killed Philip Barton Key, Sickles did not flee. He stood over the body for a moment, then calmly walked to the nearby home of Attorney General Jeremiah Black to surrender. He handed over the pistol and the opera glasses Key had thrown, a trophy of the encounter. The trial that followed was a national sensation. Sickles was charged with murder, but he assembled a dream team of defense attorneys, including James T. Brady and the formidable Edwin M. Stanton, who would later become Lincoln's Secretary of War. The defense did not deny the killing. Instead, they launched a legal strategy that would change American jurisprudence. Sickles's defense team argued that he was not liable for his actions because, at the moment of the shooting, he was driven to a state of mental aberration by the discovery of his wife's infidelity. This was the first time in United States history that the plea of temporary insanity was used as a defense. Stanton's closing argument was a tour de force of Victorian rhetoric. He appealed to the unwritten law, the societal belief that a man had a moral right to defend the sanctity of his marriage with lethal force. Stanton thundered to the jury that Sickles was a defender of the family altar, driven to madness by the serpent Key who had invaded his home. He declared, "I would have you to know that the law of the husband is the law of God." The courtroom theater was intense. When the subject of Teresa's confession was raised, Sickles began sobbing uncontrollably, a display of emotion that deeply moved the jury and spectators. On April 26, 1859, after deliberating for just 70 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Sickles was a free man. If the public hailed Sickles for the shooting, they turned on him for what followed. Shortly after the acquittal, Sickles did the unthinkable. He forgave Teresa. He publicly reconciled with her, asserting that he could not abandon the mother of his child. This act of compassion outraged Washington society more than the murder had. To the rigid moralists of the time, Teresa was a fallen woman, and by taking her back, Sickles had condoned her sin. He was ostracized, his political career seemingly dead, until the cannon fire of the Civil War offered him a new life. Daniel Sickles lived to the age of 94, dying on May 3, 1914 in New York City. His funeral was a grand affair, and he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. However, he was not buried whole. Specimen 1335 remained at the museum. The two parts of Daniel Sickles, the body in Arlington and the bones in the museum, represent the duality of his life. One part rests in the solemn rows of national heroes. The other sits in a glass case, a curiosity and a conversation piece. Sickles' legacy is complex. He shaped American law with the insanity defense. He, shaped the battlefield of Gettysburg with his disobedience. He shaped the preservation of that battlefield with his legislation, and he shaped the history of military medicine with his donation. He was a killer, a hero, a diplomat, a scandal, and a visionary. And in the halls of the National Museum of Health and Medicine, his leg bone still sits, a silent skeletal witness to a life that refused to be forgotten.